Yep, thank you everyone. So I have a few different hats. I'm on the Green Adelaide Board in Adelaide. I have my own little business, which is cool by nature, and I work for Sydney Water from here, which is great. And it's really interesting. Hang on, is that all right? Wow. It's interesting to see what's happening across Australia and in the water industry, and to be able to see how there's some really simple things that we can be doing to change the way that we use water to get the most out of it. So I'm just going through, I've got about 40 slides here. It's not a lot of text, it's just images and graphs and stuff, just to show what we can do when we sort of step back and have a look at how we're using the water. So I'm hoping all this technology works. I'm talking about technology, I do hope it works. Just a little sort of high level to start with. So why water matters, there's a lot of work that's been going on about how do we value green infrastructure, green open spaces, and you know, in Adelaide we don't have green open spaces without water. So if we go back one step and say how do we value the water that we're putting on these areas? So we know that it reduces urban heat. Some of the work that we're doing in Sydney, and I'll flick into that in a minute, but you know, there are going to be places where you're not going to be able to live in 10 or 20 years' time if we keep building the same houses that we're building and have the same increases in temperature that we're seeing now from urban heat. Some work that I've done when I was with SA Water, just looking at electricity usage, and I was doing this in my own home to see if I could actually cool down the house enough that we didn't use the air conditioner, and you could, you know, with a simple misting system and having a green lawn and a green garden, and you can actually don't need your air conditioner. So you save $200 or $300 a year on electricity. Increased carbon sequestration, improved human health and well-being. I mean, that's pretty obvious. You go into a green park, you don't go into a dead park. It increases productivity and resilience and improves biodiversity. One of the things that people do get caught up in, and I'll just sort of put it out there now, is if you're trying to reduce urban heat, so if you're trying to go for this and this, they're two different plant species. Your natives will cool, your natives won't cool very well at all. So, you know, nice big gum tree, they're great because they don't use much water, but because they don't use much water, they don't do much cooling. So as far as reducing urban heat goes, that's not what you plant. If you want biodiversity, then you plant natives. If you want both, then you have to do a mixture of both. So it's just something to bear in mind as we go through this, and I'll show you some images of that to prove it. But yeah, basically it all runs on water. I just want to flick over because what I find really interesting in Sydney is that they don't have the same water pressures, or they don't think that they've got the same water issues that we have here. Now in Adelaide we've struggled for years and years. We know every summer's going to be dry. Even a wet summer, it's still pretty dry and you still need to irrigate. In Sydney, they've been hit the last 3 years by some pretty wet summers, and we've seen all the flooding and everything. And the mentality over there is for recycled water or treated wastewater, let's just get rid of it as quickly as we can. Stormwater, where's the nearest creek? Let's go. But the interesting thing here is, so one of the areas I'm working on there is in this Western Sydney. They call it the Aerotropolis. They're building a big airport there and wanting to put 1 million people there. It's bloody hot. It's already hot, and it's farmland. So as soon as they start to put all the bitumen and the housing and everything in there, it's going to be too hot to live. And the interesting thing is there, so the approach, and I want to I'll bring it back to Adelaide, but I just wanted to sort of paint this picture. The approach there is that we're looking at harvesting stormwater, mixing it with recycled water, having all this infrastructure in place so that we can have the green trees, the wetlands, the nice parks, reusing the wastewater, and doing it at different scales and on lot on the street, and then your big parks. And I'll show you what it means. Oops. So this is one precinct in Sydney, in Western Sydney. It's about 1,000 hectares. And these little dots, these little areas here are the stormwater harvesting basins. So that that precinct there, to do that and then put that water through a third pipe back to that industrial estate, that's about $1 billion for that one. Could be two. We don't know yet. It's pretty bloody expensive. And that's to have non-potable water for greening and cooling and for industrial purposes. Now, the reason, and we're doing 6 or so precincts like that. The reason I put that up is I wanted to bring it back to here. So the work that I was doing previously in SA Water and now in the Green Adelaide Board is just looking at what we've got here from a non-potable perspective for the greening and the cooling and keeping our parks nice and green. There's a stack of stormwater harvesting systems that the councils are operating, doing a really good job, capturing that water, putting it 100, 200 metres underground in the confined aquifer, bring it back up in summer and use it for irrigation. There's no other city in Australia that's like this. Perth are doing a little bit, but it's not anywhere near as good as what we've got here. But the beauty here, oops, I'm going to keep doing that. The one thing here that a few of us have talked about in the past is that, so stormwater, these systems have been set up. Somebody looked at a page years ago and they saw that there's, maybe a gigalitre flowing down this creek, so that means we could probably harvest about half a gigalitre. But what they didn't look at is the water quality, and when the water's pissing down through those creeks, it's not good enough. It's too dirty to be actually putting it into the aquifer. So when you look at it, the amount of water that you can actually put into the aquifer is not even 10% of that flow. It's really the base flow, a fair way after a storm, when it's nice and clear and it's suitable to go into the aquifer. Otherwise it just clogs the aquifer and your investment's gone. But here, if you can start to then hook it up to the recycled water schemes that we have along the coastline, then you've got this climate independent water source, and then you can start to look at integrating all of these together. And one day I sat down and I was a little bit bored on a Friday afternoon, and I worked out how many kilometres of pipe you would need to hook up all of this and hook it all up and have pretty much Australia's biggest non-potable water network running straight down the western suburbs and a little bit out to the east as well. And it was only about 10 to 15 kilometres of pipe. It was nothing. It was really, really cheap. So we're talking, $1 billion or $2 billion in Sydney for one precinct, whereas here we're talking maybe a few tens of millions to have all of this hooked up and have as much water as we need to be not splashing around all over the place, but be able to be using it for its best purpose. So I just wanted to jump into this one a bit. Oh yeah, there's a clock, cool. We always talk about, what can we do in public open space? We've got our residents, they need to be nice and cool, and we want them to go down to the park. The interesting thing is in each suburb, the majority of the open space is private open space. So it's great if we get the parks all nice and green and put a lot of effort into them, but it's not great if the houses aren't doing the same thing as well. So there's a real benefit, and I'm not going to go into too much detail, but some of the work that I did in private open space was really simple things like grow 10 herbs, and the price that you would have paid for that at the supermarket is equivalent to the price of your outdoor water. So if you grow 10 herbs in your backyard and you use them for cooking, instead of buying it from the supermarket, you can pay for your water from that. And I won't even go into the artificial turf thing because I might offend someone, but it's bad. And it's really expensive. And there's this argument about, it saves water and it saves your money. But when you look at it, and it's an interesting one, when you look at it, so to water a square metre, it's going to cost you about $1.20 a year, using potable water, $1.20 a year, $1.50 a year. So in 10 years, you've spent $15. Fake grass lasts for 10 to 15 years and it costs you $50 a metre to install, and you throw it to landfill and you do it again. So it's just not economical, it just doesn't add up, but there's some good salesmen out there. And I'll leave it at that because I might get stuff thrown at me. So I wanted just to go into some of the ways that that you can use water, and this is like being in a utility and going out to the councils and saying, oh, you should, use more water. The council's going to say, yeah, that's great, because then you guys get more money. That's excellent. But really, in reality, the utilities don't have a lot of water to throw around. If you've got recycled water, then great. But you've still got to use it well and use it wise. And so one of the things that I've pushed in the past is knowing when and where to use your water. And so we've been using this Swan irrigation software. So really simple. Use a soil probe. There's one there. I always bring a prop. Really simple thing, like $1,000. Some air temperature sensors, and I'll go into those. They're $100. Just really simple technology. So it tells you where things are, what your weather forecast is, how much water you've got left in your budget, and then when to use it to get the better outcome. And I'll go into the detail of it. So this is what it spits out, and you look at that and you think, oh, what does it all mean? But I mean, what it's showing here is that, so these are irrigations. This is what should have been irrigated, and this is what was irrigated, and this is your soil moisture. And you can see up there, soil moisture should be in here. So it's pretty much just wasting water right through there. And then you get this big rain event, and it goes up through the roof. So, that's probably $1,000 worth of water that you could have saved in that week. It's a lot of water. This was a pretty big park. You start to use the technology, and this technology was available, but they weren't looking at it. And so I went back and had a look at it and went and showed the council and said, you could have saved a fair bit of money here. And then they stopped irrigating and started to listen, and it still tracked okay. So the interesting thing here was that they didn't really know what was going on in the soil, and a lot of times you don't, but it's just a simple probe, and it's only one probe that you need. And there's conversations about we need 10 or 20 probes per park, but if you've got one, at least you know where the benchmark is, and if some soil is going to need more water on one side of the park than the other, then you can start to make those calculations. But basically just gives you past, present, and so that's present, and then it shows you what's coming up. So it's linked to the Bureau of Meteorology. I'm not trying to sell different systems or anything, but this was one of the better ones that I've worked with, and it just paid off as far as I was concerned. This is some real data. So this was over, I think it was 2020 or 2019 in Adelaide. So this was about 25 different parks, and that blue line, so I think that's that's the temperature and your rainfall. And that blue line running through there is the volume of water that should have been used on those parks according to the probes and the Bureau of Meteorology information. And this was the water that was used. And the really interesting thing is here, and I've fallen into this trap myself at my own house. You go through January, February, it's hot, and you're thinking, winter's coming, autumn's coming soon, it should rain, and it doesn't. And so then you just start pouring the water on through March, and that's what's happened here. And again, some of this is also sporting fields, so trying to get the sports fields looking good for the upcoming winter season. But a fair bit of overuse there. And what it equated to was about a 30% overuse and about $5 million worth of water. So it was, and then when you start to look at that across the state, that's 5 gigalitres of water. So that's a fair bit of water that's being used there. I just wanted to throw this up because this is an interesting thing again. So this is Sydney the last year, and you can see here there's no irrigation. This is just all rainfall, and you can see that the things are just through the roof. It's bloody wet. So I was trying to introduce smart irrigation over there, and then when I saw this graph, I thought, well, I'll just wait a couple of summers until it's a bit drier because it's not going to work. And the way I've sort of looked at it is you only need to be looking at one park, and then from that park you get some information. If you've got similar parks where you've got similar turf, similar soils and a similar outcome, because all of that goes into it, just monitor one park and then that can inform the others. So it saves you a fair bit of money with your monitoring. And then you've got another set of parks that are a bit different, so you put a probe in there. So you really only need sort of 10 to 20%. And this was the savings from one council in Adelaide, and it looked at around $100,000 a year. So you've got this initial investment of $19,000, annual $7,000, and you're saving $100,000 a year. So it sort of works really from the cost perspective. But the other part, and this is where I'm sort of going back into the broader conversation about open space and public and private. One of the things in the water industry has always been about water conservation. We've got to conserve our water. And interestingly, water conservation, we've all seen it in the droughts. Turn your taps off, don't irrigate your grass, don't irrigate your parks, let everything die off because we don't have enough water. And that's fine because you do need water for drinking. But the interesting part of that is that once everything starts to die off, it's hard to get it back again. It costs a lot of money to get it back again, and your irrigation systems, and then the heat comes up, and there's a lot of depression in the community, and all of those sorts of things. So there's some real interesting follow-ons from it, and water conservation just looks at that water component. But if you start to talk about effective water use, and you start to think about, I can save money by not using my air conditioner. I can take the family down to the park because we know it's cool, so we're not sitting at home with the air conditioner on and they're sitting looking at their iPads. You can start to get better amenity. People are feeling a bit better because they can go to a park and it's nice and green. So once you start to look at all of those other factors and you start to talk about effective water use rather than water conservation, it just sort of opens up that conversation a bit more and you can start to value it. But then, as I was saying before, if you've got this in your park, so if this smart irrigation system is in this park and you live over here, what I'd love to be able to do is like working with the councils to then send that information to that resident and they go, oh yeah, okay, I need to be turning off my water, I shouldn't be irrigating for the next week. Or, council looks like they're irrigating on Friday, I should irrigate then too. Or the converse of this is, there's a heat wave coming, irrigate a couple of days before the heat wave. Don't irrigate on the same day as the heat wave because your water's not going into the ground, it's just evaporating. If you water it a couple of days before, it actually it improves the resilience of the vegetation, the water goes in the soil, and when you get home on that really hot day, things are nice and cool. This is some other work. So this talks about technology and just knowing things. So I've been putting these little babies up in Canberra. I put 250 up in Adelaide, not this sort, a different sort. It's on the SA Water website. I think it's still on there. And you can see live data from all these different parks around Adelaide. So you jump on there on a hot day and you go, that park's hot, that park's cold, I'll take the family down there, kids can run around, they're not going to bother me. So putting these up around, these ones now are NB-IoT, so they operate it with a SIM card. They cost like $2 a month to operate and they cost $100 to buy. And you start to put them around. So I've put them around in Canberra and Sydney, and I mean, this is not a very warm day, typical Canberra day, but you can start to then work out what's cool and what's not. And the reason we were doing it in Canberra was there's a lot of developers that are coming to the ACT government and saying, we want to develop this area, but we don't have enough space for green open space, so we want to do a green wall or a green roof. And there's not enough evidence out there to say yes or no, that's not going to cool or that is going to cool. So what we were trying to do was find out what tree species cool best, what vegetation, parks, whatever will cool the best. So really simple information, but being able to make a real difference. And so this is an Adelaide one, and you can see here it's 31 degrees there and 25 degrees there. So you just put them up a tree in a bit of shade, and and you've got this live data, which is fantastic. And that's Canberra again. This was some work. This one I just throw in every now and then because it's a really interesting one. This was over in Perth, and there's this park here, and one of the things that, and I'll show you some slides on that, one of the things that interests me is that, you know, green is cool and anything else is sort of not. And so this is a bit of dead sort of sandy area, and the interesting part about it is you've got those suburbs around it, but when you put a heat map over it, you can see that it's generating so much heat, and that heat is actually going up into the suburban areas. And so, you know, that part could be cooler, and then these people are not using their air conditioner as much and the cost of living is not as high, or it could be bloody hot like it is. And so the residents there actually went to the council and said, can you do something about it? Because they actually felt the heat coming off that big sandy patch. And the funny thing was that just over here, there's this beautiful green park, a cricket oval, and another one here. Like, I've never seen that sort of green before. When I was flying in, I just thought, wow, that's a green I've never seen before. And they were using something like 15 to 20 megalitres per hectare on this, and nothing on this. So, you know, twice as much water as what they needed on here, and nothing over here. So there was a pretty interesting conversation going on there with the residents and the council, and they ended up fixing it. But yeah, just a really good visual of, you know, what works and what doesn't. Brown open space, I just wanted to throw this one in there. Just, you know, brown open space and green open space, the only difference is water in here, which has a cost associated with it. But then you start to get into the economics, and this is where, I don't know, it's a bit, you know, I'm not an economist, or sometimes it just goes over my head, but I was just sort of looking at this from a park. So the government values a life at $4 million. Now that depends on if it's a kid or if it's an old person that's hasn't got as long to live, but what they're saying is that that's the value, that's the contribution that they'll make to society is worth $4 million. So if you think about this park here, if you think that maybe, just maybe, one day in a century, someone's going to be sitting under that tree, it drops a limb and they die. You could actually, if you could prevent that from happening, you could spend $40,000 a year on irrigation to stop that limb from falling off and killing that person. Now it's really super hypothetical, but it's just one of those things that if you stand back and look and you start to look at all the different components, like, you know, what adds up and what doesn't add up. So just wanted to throw that out there as a bit of a thought piece. I'm happy to be challenged. If anyone says that's bullshit, then, you know, just say it, but it's just, I don't know, it is hypothetical. This isn't hypothetical. So this is, again, just looking at parks, and, you know, you see a lot of these parks around where they've got bark chip, and in this park here, the only cool space is in that little bit of shade there. Everywhere else, it's bloody hot. Whereas over here, that whole area is a lot cooler. So because there's water in the soil, and there's healthy green vegetation. So it's, you don't get cooling and you don't get healthy vegetation if you don't have water in the soil. And some might say, I don't believe it, but I'll give you the evidence. So here's, I think it was a 30-degree day a couple of years ago in Adelaide. And so there's your first park out at Thorndon Reservoir. 26 degrees, you got water there, you got a lot of green, you got a lot of cooling. So, you know, 4 degrees lower than the temperature at that time. That was from a Bureau of Meteorology looking at the temperature at that time. So this is from one of those sensors. Here's another one just down from it. Nice little pocket park, fair few trees around the edge, and then nice sort of green grass in the middle, and 2 degrees cooler than the Bureau measurement at that time. And then here's another park not far away, more canopy cover, no irrigation, dead grass, 5 degrees hotter. So, you know, if you've got a family and you're living here, you're going to go there, you're not going to go there. So the question is, you know, the council doing a lot of work here, they're mowing the grass, they're looking after it, they might have toilets there, they might have a playground there. is that investment really worthwhile if nobody's going to go there because it's hotter than the park down the road? So that's the sort of information that just one simple little sensor can give you, well you need 3 in this situation, to really start to make those informed decisions about where you should be spending your money. And so the question then, like when I show that slide, what I'd like to throw in after that is canopy cover the real measure for livability? Like, you know, everyone talks about, oh, we need more canopy cover, but and that's true, but it depends on the canopy, it depends on the tree, it depends on what the outcome is, and this park would be a hell of a lot cooler than this park if it had the same amount of water on it. So yeah, just wanted to throw that in as well. It's not just the shade that's going to keep you cool. Oh look, this is getting a bit controversial, but some of these, I had this thermal imaging camera and I was going around on hot days and just looking at the temperature of the parks, and you know, some of these soft fall areas were, I was trying to cook an egg on one of them actually, because it was so hot. It was 90 degrees surface temperature, and I had a little fry pan and egg, and that didn't work. So then I cracked the egg straight onto the soft fall, and that didn't cook either. And then I had to clean up the mess because I thought if the council go past and see me cooking eggs on the soft fall, it might not go down well. I think I had an SA Water car parked next to it as well, so yeah, it wouldn't have gone down well. But then, you know, if you start to incorporate it with a decent canopy cover and a bit of grass around it, then that just takes the sting out of it. So it's just sort of thinking about how we can solve a problem. And the interesting thing, I was standing back one day and it was so bloody hot on this soft fall. It was like this, and you could feel the heat as you were coming up to it. And I thought, so if I'm a kid and I fall off that little swing there, I wonder if I'm better off hitting a, you know, sandy surface or something that may be grassed, or, you know, that might hurt a bit more when I hit it, but at least it's not going to burn me when I hit it. So, you know, do you want the bruise or do you want the burn? And I think that's the conversation. This is just getting a bit morbid, but this is, you know, people die. When the temperature goes, and these are all like really, you know, they've done this for every city and looked at. So this is Adelaide. When the average temperature, so that's the max and the minimum for the day, when it gets above 32 degrees, you get a 2 to 8% increase in people dying. And it's not just the people that were going to die that week anyway, it is actually others that you know, it brings it forward and makes people die. The interesting thing is when you look at this for other states, the numbers are back here somewhere. So I think we're a bit tougher down here. There's a bit of humidity in there as well in other states, but it's really interesting how Adelaide, our death rate doesn't start until, you know, it's a little bit hotter. Look, this is another little concept. I like to just put little concepts out and just, you know, just to start to look at things differently. So here's a typical park, and there's a lot of papers and things out there that talks about the parks and how they're almost like an evaporative cooler. You know, they're using evaporation and transpiration to cool the air. And so this was one that I was looking at, and you just think, if you've got that park there, and then you've got all these street trees down here, it's almost like the air conditioning duct in the roof, you know, and it's sort of transporting that cooler air away from the park and into the suburbs. So just a little concept, just a different way to think about it. There's no point spending a stack of money on one thing and then you've got a desert around it. You've got to, you know, try and incorporate it into the urban fabric. And this is another one. So you're sitting at home, you've got your G&T and you're having a great time sitting there, and your kids say, I want to go to the park. Well, that's great, but if you're walking down this sort of street, well, you're going to be hot. It's like when you go to the beach and you know, oh great, I'm going to get to the beach, and you walk across the sand and you jump in the water, and then by the time you walk back across the sand back to the car, you're hot again. So, you know, we've got to make sure that our transport, our conduits down to those parks are nice and green as well, so they're attractive, so you're not going to get hot. That's if you're not going to drive, you know. So this is the beauty of a thermal imaging camera. So this is, I used to live in Semaphore, I've now just moved down to Onka Hills. But there was one day I had my thermal imaging camera out there and I was looking, and this was my neighbour's place, and it's just dead and 70 degrees or 75 degrees or something. You can see it's as hot as the road. That bare earth is as hot as the road. Really important point. Fake grass would be about 10 degrees hotter, but I won't go there. And the neighbour came out and he said, "Oh, what are you up to?" Because I've got this gun thing, you know, buzzing around. And I said, "Oh, well, I'm just, you know, looking at the temperature out here." And he said, "Oh, well, show me." And I showed him. And then I did my place. So, yeah, a nice little, I don't know, golden elm or something. Irrigated the grass, and that was the temperature. It was about 30 degrees, and it was about a 35-degree day. And he looked at me and said, "Well, who cares? What's that matter?" And I said, "Well, have you got your air conditioner on at the moment?" And he said, "Yeah." And I said, "We don't." So we live right next door, same sort of 130-year-old house, and he's got his air conditioner running. He's spending, you know, a few bucks an hour running that constantly, and we've got nothing running because we're getting cool. And the way I looked at it, and so I think he changed his ways. They actually fixed up their garden. But I always looked at this as it cost about 20 bucks a year to irrigate that, but it was, I was calling it my cool curtain between the heat of the road and the house. So, you know, the roads are going to be hot. There's nothing you can do about that. But if you've got this sort of barrier, you can start to actually cool the air that's coming into your house. Again, sort of reducing your electricity use. This was just an idea. You know, once we get more sensors out there and satellite data, you can start to look at where you walk, so you can start to avoid the hot spots. And yeah, putting that out to people, and then taking that one step further. So if you've got a cafe, and you're in here, and there's another cafe over here, you know that people are going to go there. They're going to come through this nice park, walk down here. It's nice and cool, and they'll go to that cafe. So if you're paying the same rent here and here, you know that this one here is getting ripped off because they want to have. Yeah, they're not going to get as many pedestrians. So having that information out there, I mean, people, you don't have to have this type of information to know where it's cool and where it's not. We feel it. You can go out there and you can feel it on a hot day. I'm not going to go too far into this. This is some really heavy economic stuff that I saw last week. And what they've done is they've gone and looked at, across Australia, what's the economic value of doing things as normal, you know, just a little bit of water on the parks or no water at all on the parks versus putting a fair bit of water on or putting a lot of water on. And so they've looked at, you know, how much extra water it uses and all of that sort of thing, but how much temperature it can reduce by, and then how clean the air is, visual amenity, all of those sorts of things. So they've looked at it from 4 different states, including ours. And from that, so if you go into, you know, if you went to Treasury, for instance, and said, oh, hang on, I'll get to if you went to Treasury and you said, now if we water the park and it's going to cost us an extra $5,000 a year to water that park, but we're going to get all of these millions of dollars of benefit to the community, is it worthwhile? And you know, this is the stuff that you need to be able to convince the bean counters that it is actually worthwhile. So that's the work that's going on now in the water industry, to say actually you can start to reduce the cost to society and the cost of living and all of these sorts of things just by having better open space and using water. So how do we change? Look, we've got information out there. There's so much info out there now. It's about getting it out to people, and that's why I don't mind coming and doing these talks, you know, just to show there's some really simple things that you can do to get that information out there. But from organisations, like there's heaps of stuff out there as well that organisations have access to, but they're just, I don't know, there just seems to be not enough of joining the dots. You know, the bean counters are sitting in one area, the parks guys are sitting in another area, guys and girls are sitting in another area, and they're not talking about the benefits and how we can cost it and how we can actually account for it. So there really needs to be something different done. And I mean, at the moment we're talking about sustainability, and this is some of these principles of circular economy where you do something that actually makes you money. And they're talking now about how in the future we can't just go carbon neutral, we need to go carbon positive, so we actually need to be putting more carbon in than what's coming out. Just doing simple things like, sort of gardens down in your park, trying to get some value out of the parks that can pay for the water, pay for the maintenance, but then also capture the carbon and start to go to this sort of regenerative approach. I've just bought a little farm and I'm trying to do that myself. So it takes a bit of effort. But I think once the methodologies are out there and people start to do it a bit more, it'll become easier. So yeah, look, I just wanted to finish off with some of these. There's, again, in SA Water, looking at all of these different tools that can account for who spends it and who gets the benefit from it. So there's a lot of work out there. It's just really about socialising it. And this is a really cool one. This is just, I think this was from a park, irrigating a park, and who benefits. So Sid, SA Water was going to pay for a bit of it. The residents would pay a bit through their rates, but then, the benefit to the residents is huge, and there's a big benefit to the council. So, just starting to break it down a bit and looking at those benefits. There's a lot, like I said, there's a lot of info out there. Green Adelaide Board, we're doing a fair bit of work through grants, through coming up with different policies and that sort of thing to try and influence the state government to then influence the councils and get the councils to influence the state government. So it's a two-way street. There's a lot of talk about, we need better policy and we need different things. My approach has always been, let's do the stuff on the ground first, measure it, show that it works, show what the benefits can be, and then pass that up the chain so that then informs policy. It's really hard for people that are so far removed from what's going on the ground to make decisions that will benefit what's on the ground. And I'll just quickly, just one real example of that was the project I did at Adelaide Airport. Really simple, taking a bit of recycled water, irrigating a cropper lucerne, showing that it reduces the temperature by about 5 degrees, which then reduces the fuel use of the planes as they take off. Really simple idea, but it's not until you stand back and you look at it and you actually do the on-ground work and you go, oh shit, 5 degrees, that's pretty good. And then you go, oh, so what does that mean for a plane? Oh, wow, okay. They're saving thousands of dollars worth of fuel, so that's a real benefit. So just starting to join all of those dots, it's what we need to do. Stand back and look. It's all there, the puzzle's there, but all the pieces are there. We've just got to put it all together. And I think that's it. That's it. Yes, thanks.
Does anyone have any questions? We've got about 8 minutes before we break, so if anyone's got any questions, Greg's here for, 8 minutes, so. Yep.
Greg, just in regards to softball use around playgrounds, we've been trying to, look at different alternatives. We use the softball, the pipe, the bark and so forth, and then we've even experimented with sand. Is there much of a difference in regards, obviously I get the sand will generate more heat on a hot day. Is there much information regarding that?
They're all sort of pretty similar, and I think what would ultimately be the best outcome would be the softball was white or a lighter grey or something, but then, because that's everything that's white is so much cooler. Even roads, and I've seen these papers where they've painted roads and they're 5 to 10 degrees cooler because they're white. But then there's that argument of, okay, so then they look dirty, so how do you keep them clean? But sort of trying to find that happy medium between black and white, which is probably grey, I suppose, to make sure that you still get the benefit from it. I'm not saying that it's bad, it's great, because it is nice and soft, and my kids fall over all the time. So you've got to have something there, and sand, cats shit in, and just needles and all sorts. So you've got to try and have something that's safe, but not hurt. Yeah. But I don't know, is there anyone from the softball industry here that can do some grey softball?
We've got two two representatives from Jeffries here, but I'm not sure they're in the manufacturing side of it. They'll happily sell you some softball.
Can you paint it? Yeah, and that's it. Yeah, just lighter colours. Lighter colours is where it's at. If you can't put water on and you can't get it to go green, then try and make it go white.
Are there any other questions?
Cool. Thanks.
Thank you, mate. I've got some gifts here for you, just as a token of our appreciation. As I've said repeatedly, our speakers today are volunteering their time today.
Oh, nice. My favourite.
Thank you so
Oh,
much.
and my favourite too.
There you go, perfect.
Thanks, mate.
Yeah.
Thanks.